Hey folks, this is Kalani. Patch 10.1.5 introduces the new Mega Dungeon, the Dawn of the Infinite. It's an 8-boss dungeon which plays more like a mini raid, so these bosses are definitely harder than your average dungeon boss, but fear not, we've got a handy dandy guide to show you how to best approach each boss, so you can go in there and grab some of that shiny gear. Now before we jump in, be sure to hit up that like button and subscribe so you never miss another video. The first boss we face is Chronikar, who has a few very important abilities. To start with, Sand Stomp will mark every player with a circle, and after a short delay you deal AoE damage around you and drop a sand puddle. Don't overlap them and drop them at the side of the room to keep the encounter space clear. The main ability to watch out for is Eon Shatter. The boss is going to leap between players, dealing big damage in a large circle, and it also spawns a smaller circle that needs to be soaked. So marked players move out of the group. When the big circle turns more solid and the arrow disappears from above your head, the target is locked on. Move out of the big circle and then move back in to soak the small circle afterwards. You should have enough time to always get the small soaks, and make sure you're dodging the little missiles that fire out. If you miss a small soak, your entire group is going to take huge AoE damage and damage over time, so you really can't miss them. And then the boss also uses Chrono Shear, dealing heavy damage to your tanks, applying a healing absorb as well as a nasty debuff. The debuff increases the damage your tanks take until it's dispelled, but you can't dispel it while the healing absorb persists, so use some big heals, get that absorb shield off, and then dispel the tank. And that's pretty much it. As long as you handle the big circle little circle dance well, this boss isn't too bad. Up next, we're going against the manifested Timeways. Throughout the fight, the area is going to be split into two different types of areas. The light yellow areas are fast zones, and then the darker brown areas are slow zones. I hope you're not colorblind. You will take constant damage over time no matter which zone you are in, but the fast zone is going to increase your movement speed, while the slow zone gives you a 20% damage reduction buff. The zones constantly rotate around the boss, and they also interact with various abilities. Your tank must always stay in melee range of the boss, otherwise it will enrage, dealing AoE damage and getting a stacking damage increase buff, so always engage the boss in melee. Throughout the fight, the boss will throw out these little fragments of time balls. If you get hit by them, you'll take damage and stacking damage over time, so you'll want to dodge those. They move faster in the fast zones and slower in the slow zones. The slow zones create big gaps in the circle of balls, which gives you an easy spot to dodge through them. The other major ability is Chrono Fade. This is a magic debuff that deals damage over time to the affected player, but if the player is standing in the fast zone, it deals damage faster, so try and stay in the slow zone to reduce the damage taken. When the debuff expires or is dispelled, the player shoots out a big wave, and that wave moves faster if you get dispelled while in the fast zone, and slower if you get dispelled in the slow zone. You'll actually want to try and get dispelled while in the fast zone, because the slow waves stick around way longer and end up being more of a nuisance. And then this boss also has a Tank Buster. Unwind deals heavy damage at a frontal cone twice in quick succession, so no one should stand on the tank and your tank is going to get trucked. If your tanks are in the slow zone, the second hit will come much later, giving your healers time to top them off. With the damage reduction buff in place, your tank should probably stay in the slow zone as much as they can, but definitely during Unwind. That's it for this boss though, it's a pretty easy one for the most part. Moving on, we're going to take on the Blight of Galakrond. This one can get messy real fast. The main problem is corrosive infusion. You'll have a whole bunch of swirls to dodge. If you get hit, you'll take a bunch of damage and get stunned, so avoid those, but one player will also get a corrosion debuff. This debuff lasts for 12 seconds, deals damage over time, and if it ever expires, the player will become mind controlled. To prevent that, you need to pass it on to another player before it expires. Just run over someone else and you'll pass the debuff on and it restarts that 12-second timer. The next ability is Blight Reclamation. This is a frontal cone on a tank that deals damage and pulls anyone who gets hit into the boss. This ability also removes the corrosion debuff, so you need to get hit by this frontal if you have the debuff, or pass the debuff to the tank just before the next reclamation is cast. The boss always seems to use this at 0 energy, so if the boss is super low on energy, pass the debuff to the tank next and that should take care of itself. The boss is also going to constantly leave puddles of ooze beneath it, so kite it around the room to make sure the puddles don't ever get too huge, and then at 80% health the boss turns into Anzon. It will use all the same abilities but also gain necrotic winds. This ability deals heavy group-wide damage, knocks you back, and spawns tornadoes that shoot outwards from the boss. You want to group up as best you can for this and use some big healing cooldowns while dodging the tornadoes. At 50% health, the boss splits into Lozkaleth and Dazhak. Lozkaleth will use Necrofrost. This traps a player in frost, reducing their haste and dealing damage over time. Your DPS need to break the frost by DPSing it down to free the player. Dazhak will use Incinerating Blight Breath. It's a big breath attack, so just don't stand in front of this mob while the breath is happening. And Noxious Ejection just deals a lot of damage, so your healers need to be on their toes. The two bosses do share health, so just nuke them down as quickly as you can. Then we come to Iridikron the Stone Scaled. This boss has a lot of specific abilities in that you need to deal with them in the exact correct way or you're going to have a bad time. The first big ability is Extinction Blast. This targets one player with a big AoE circle. Chromie will teleport nearby that player and put up a time bubble. The player with the big AoE circle needs to stand on Chromie, but everyone else in your group can stand away for now. As soon as that blast goes off, Chromie will become exhausted and have a massive damage increasing debuff, and Iridikron lines up some more damage right towards her with Stonecracker Barrage. Your tank will want to soak the little circles in front of Chromie, while everyone else stands on top of Chromie to split the damage. If you do this right, you'll get a big haste buff to go back to DPSing the boss. If Chromie starts getting too low on health, your healer should top them up whenever possible. Another important ability is Earth Surge. The boss shields himself and starts pulsing for group-wide AoE damage. The damage also increases for each pulse, so you need to break the shield quickly by DPSing the boss. During this ability, the boss also starts sending out huge earth spikes in long lines, so you have to dodge those while DPSing the shield down. There's also a massive breath attack to watch out for, Pulverizing Exhalation. It covers a huge portion of the encounter space, and each player also gets a small AoE circle around them. You'll want to move as a group to avoid the breath, but don't overlap the circles and stay close. When the debuff expires, each player is going to spawn an ad, so group them up and nuke them down quickly. Throughout all of this, the boss is also going to be applying a stacking damage increasing debuff on your tanks, so keep an eye on your tank's health and use cooldowns where needed. When the boss gets to 100 energy, you are in the burn phase. Chromie puts up a time bubble to give you a massive buff, so stand in that. You're going to get increased damage, haste, cooldown rate, and resource regeneration, so put everything you have into DPSing the boss here. The more damage you put into the boss, the more energy he will lose, and you need to get him to 0 energy before he finishes his cast. And that's it. If you get him to 0 energy here, you win. If you don't, you will wipe. Alright, up next we're facing off against Tia. He has 3 main attacks in his Infinite Hand technique. Titanic Blow is a frontal cone attack against your tank that deals damage and knocks them back. Don't get knocked off the platform and don't stand on top of the tanks for this one. Titanic Blow also leaves behind a Consecration AoE on the ground that deals damage if you stand in it, so just don't stand in it. Infinite Annihilation is another big cone attack, but this one goes onto a random player, so just dodge out of that. Once again, it will leave behind the consecrated ground, so just don't stand in it. And then the last ability in this trio is Dividing Strike. This deals damage in a small area near the boss, and it needs to be split between your group, so everyone quickly stack in the circle. If Dividing Strike doesn't hit at least 2 players, the boss gains a stacking damage increase buff for the rest of the fight, so make sure you're stacking properly. Then we also have Spark of Tia. This is a magic debuff that goes onto 2 players and it deals AoE damage, so spread out a little bit. When you dispel it or when it expires, it deals group-wide AoE damage, so just dispel one quickly, heal up, and then dispel the other one when you're ready. When the boss gets to 0 energy, he's going to gain a big shield and lots of orbs will appear around the room. The orbs will try to get to the pillar in the center of the platform, and if an orb reaches that pillar, the boss's shield gets bigger and it deals raid-wide AoE damage, so you want to collect all of the orbs while DPSing the boss's absorb shield. Collecting an orb also gives you a haste and movement speed buff, so even more reason to collect them. And that's it really, just rinse and repeat until the boss is dead. The next boss we're going to tackle is Morchie. This is a pretty easy one, but it can get very messy very quickly. She always pelts the tank with Sand Blast, which deals damage in a straight line, so do not stand behind the tank. She's also going to spawn time traps around the arena. If you step into one of these traps, you'll get rooted for 30 seconds, which definitely isn't ideal, especially during the next ability, Familiar Faces. This spawns an ad for each player. The copy of a player will always fixate on and chase their player, and these ads deal damage in a small area around them, so don't let them catch you. The easiest way to deal with these ads is to just drag them through a time trap. That will lock them in stasis so you can go back to DPSing the boss. You just need to be careful not to trigger the trap yourself. And then the major ability here that will probably cause a lot of wipes is more problems. A bunch of Morchies appear around the room, and one of them is the real one. It's always the one without a hat, so quickly find the Morchie without a hat and go stand behind them. When they finish their cast, they breathe across the entire platform, so the only safe spot is right behind the right Morchie. As long as you time trap your ads and you can spot the real Morchie quickly, this one isn't too bad. Up next, we're heading to the Timelost battlefield. The boss will be called different things depending on your faction, but all of the abilities are basically the same. The most dangerous ability here is probably Blade Storm. The boss jumps to a random target and starts blade storming on them and chasing them. Just kite the boss around the room to avoid dying. The other dangerous ability is Shockwave. The boss will start spamming big cone attacks in random directions. Just dodge them the best you can. Battle Cry is a group-wide damage AoE. You can't avoid it, so just heal it up, and then for the Alliance or for the Horde we'll summon a few ads into the mix, just cleave them down quickly. The boss also uses Mortal Strikes on your tank. It deals a lot of damage and applies a healing reduction debuff that lasts for 5 seconds. Just make sure you use a cooldown to help out the healer until that debuff falls off. And then for every little ad around this room that the boss kills, they gain a stack of battle senses. This causes their next attack to deal group-wide AoE damage, so try not to drag the boss over the ads during Blade Storm and things like that, but if a few ads die, it's not a big deal, it's going to happen, just be ready for those extra heals. And then we're finally on the last boss, Chronolord Deios. This one can be pretty tricky, but I have confidence that you'll do just fine. The main ability to watch out for is Infinity Orbs. The boss will spawn 2 orbs above 2 random players' heads. The orbs then start falling to the ground. If you stand underneath an orb, its descent is slowed significantly. When an orb reaches the ground, it does group-wide AoE damage and applies a debuff that increases the damage of the orb AoE by 300% for 4 seconds, so you need to space these out. When the 2 orbs appear, one player should stand still to slow the drop of one orb while the other player moves away. That lets one orb drop quickly, and as soon as your debuff falls off, the second orb player can step away to let that one drop as well. This will probably be the main cause of most of your wipes, so make sure everyone knows that only one orb can drop at a time. The boss also has a breath attack, Temporal Breath, that deals damage and damage over time. This always goes on your tank, so just face the boss away from your group. And then during the first phase, the boss also summons infinite Timekeepers. You want to swap to these ads ASAP and nuke them down. Every Timekeeper that you kill will remove 20% of the boss's health, so that's how you're going to progress the fight. Each active rift will also start spawning ads, so you want to group those up and cleave them down. The Timekeepers will apply debuffs to random players, so dispel those when you can, and just try to keep everyone alive. When all 4 Timekeepers are dead, the boss will start corrupting Nosdormu. This creates a whole bunch of swirls that you need to dodge. The big swirls leave behind sand puddles that deal a lot of damage if you stand in them, so rotate around the room and try to maximize your area space. You will still have Infinity Orbs to deal with and the Temporal Breath, and this is basically just one big burn phase. You need to kill the boss before you run out of space or the boss kills you. And that's it, every boss in the new Dawn of the Infinite Megadungeon and how to kill them. I hope this guide helps you get some shiny loot and maybe even some of those quantum mounts. But that's everything you should need to clear the Dawn of the Infinite Megadungeon in patch 10.1.5, so that's it for this video. Which boss do you think looks like the hardest? Are you going to try and clear the dungeon on Mythic, or just wait until it becomes available on Heroic mode? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to all of our members here on YouTube. You can see the names floating by on screen. If you'd like to add your name to the end of every video with a special shout out at the start of the next video, you can find links in the description over to Patreon or click the join button just below this video. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another video. Thanks for watching, folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.